Hey, Ken.
Hello. Oh, hey. Sorry. Hello, Matt. I'm Ed. Nice to speak with you. Especially you, Matt. I've been a huge fan for years. My question is pertaining to atheism and funerals.
Yep.
And a little bit of background. I was a mortician for 3 years. I've been an atheist pretty much all my life. Never really came to the position. It's just I never really believed. But I was a funeral director for 3 years, and during that time, you kind of have to put on an act. Like I would have to say the Lord's Prayer, give benediction, do a whole bunch of things, and I just grew uncomfortable with it because while it wasn't a false face, I did have genuine sympathy. It wasn't in the same way that these people wanted it. They wanted me to tell them that their God was looking out for their loved one eternally, and it just I would tell them that, but I wouldn't feel it.
Yeah.
And it got me to think when my mother dies, and she's going to die eventually. But when she does die, am I going to go through the same false face? Like my loved ones are going to expect a classic Christian funeral. But I've always believed the funeral is for the living, not the dead.
Yep.
I'm the next of kin.
It's strange because Ed and I actually broached this topic a little last night. So I'll let him start, and I might chime in with something later.
So I mentioned my dad is 81 years old, and 3 or 4 years ago, I had a dream that he died, and that my Pentecostal stepmother and I got into a fight about the funeral because she wanted a religious funeral, and I didn't think that was appropriate given my father was an atheist. And so I called my dad, and I told him about the dream, and he kind of laughed, and he said, "This doesn't sound terribly far-fetched." And I said, "No," I said, "that's why I'm calling you. I think maybe it's a good idea that you make your wishes known now so that they avoid any unpleasantries." And this is kind of classic my dad. He said, let her do what she wants. I don't plan to be there anyway. So the thing is, that's not what I would prefer. I would prefer not having a minister overseeing the funeral, all of that. But if my dad doesn't care, and it's going to make her happy, whatever. I mean, I think what probably will end up happening for us is that there will be a funeral that's overseen by my stepmother's pastor, who knows my dad well. It's not like this would be a total stranger, and that I'll end up giving the eulogy, as I did with my mother 20 years ago. So maybe there's a little bit of a counterpoint there. But, I'll be able to tell the story of, this is who my dad really was, and this is what he really believed. And all that seems fine by me.
And I'm in a now your situation is a little weirder because you are in a service industry where you're expected to do certain things. And I don't know enough about it to comment, because I can only imagine that if I was a funeral director and someone came up and wanted me to say or expected me to say religious platitudes about heaven or what's going on with them and going up to God's loving arms and grace and whatever else, I wouldn't say that. And if I would just, they get to have whatever sort of ceremony and beliefs that they want. It shouldn't matter to them what their funeral director believes. And granted, I'm not in that position, so I wouldn't view my job as, requiring, expecting me to provide religious comfort. But I've never been involved in it, so I can't say. What I do know is most of my family's religious. They're all going to have religious services. I will be at them. I won't be lying to anybody to say that, mom's in heaven, dad's in heaven, whatever. I'm going to talk about the people and what the people meant to me and what I think about it. When I die, I chop me up into a bunch of pieces, let people use whatever parts of this body they can possibly benefit from, burn the rest, and try to be, not terrible about where you store it. And I'm pretty sure that my wife will go along with that. But let's say I had died before I got married. Let's say I died 2 years into the show when I'm an outspoken atheist and my family are fundamentalist Christians. They would have been the ones who decided what happened and what sort of funeral that I had. I don't care. I'm far more concerned about why they feel this need to have a religious funeral, why they believe things for the wrong reasons, than the fact that they actually want me to have some sort of Christian funeral, because I'm dead. It doesn't affect, I can't do anything about it. I made up my mind a long time ago to not spend much time worrying about things that I can't possibly do anything about. So I'll try to leave the world a little better than the way I found it. But, you know, when I'm dead, man, if they take me to a tractor pull and tie ropes on both ends and whatever you want, it doesn't matter to me. But I'm not the norm. And there's something important here that I actually discussed with David Smalley after his debate. And that is this. Whether or not you live in a culture that makes it likely that your wishes about your body and how it's to be disposed of or cherished or whatever are to be respected affects the sort of life you have. If you live in a culture where your wishes are disregarded, like, for example, the government decides, hey, everybody's a forced organ donor. When you die, we're harvesting your body and giving it out because we think that's for the greater good. The people who aren't supportive of that idea live a life full of anxiety and dread about what's going to happen to them afterwards. We don't respect the wishes of the dead to support the dead. We respect the wishes of the dead to support the life that they had and what their wishes were during that life, so that they didn't have to sit here going, oh my gosh, when I'm dead, what are they going to do to me? We're going to do exactly what you wanted, or we're going to try to. And occasionally there's going to be fights and disagreements. But at the end of the day, if it's not about celebrating the parts of someone's life that you shared with them, and the good things in that life, if somebody just can't appreciate that unless you also douse it in religion, that's their problem.
I think there's I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was listening.
Well, there's also this issue, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I gave the eulogy at my mother's funeral. Now, my mother was my biological mother. And she was one of those kind of vague, I believe in a higher power that's looking over us kind of, things. But she did have a minister, a really wonderful minister, who oversaw the funeral, and she was really great. But she had asked me, she was terminally ill for 4 years, and she had asked me pretty early on if I would do the eulogy. And so I had some time to prepare for this, although there's no preparing for it. When it actually happened, it really was disturbing to me of trying to figure out what am I going to say. And I knew that I kind of had to broach this subject a little bit, And so I said, toward the end of the eulogy, I said, look, the family obviously knows that I don't believe in God. I don't believe that there's a heaven. I would love to believe that someday I'll be reunited with my mother. But I see no reason to believe that. I see no evidence to compel my belief in that. But here's what I do know. We live on in the way that we affected other people. That's the only form of immortality that we have, and quite frankly, it's the only form of immortality that really matters. And so I said, my mother had 27 grandchildren. Every time one of those grandchildren goes fishing, they're going to remember how Grandma taught them how to put a worm on the hook. Every time they make an apple pie that she showed them how to make. For me, every time I heard a Barbra Streisand song, that was her favorite singer, or I drove by a Bill Knapp's, because for some reason she loved Bill Knapp's, and I don't think they even exist anymore. Those are the things that trigger these memories, these good memories that we have. And so that's immortality in the only sense that it can exist, I think. And quite frankly, I think that's enough.
That's actually a very good answer. And I agree with you. I'm definitely on the same page with you two gentlemen. I really don't care what happens to me. But it's just, death is kind of I'm not a mortician anymore. I was for 3 years. Yeah. But it's still something that is kind of a passion for me, because I look at the world and I see how much, how much we do is dedicated to kind of erasing death or the thought of death. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to funerals, we almost concede that to the religious group.
There's one bit of caution here. We live in a world where most of what we think about life and death has been colored, if not poisoned, by religious doctrines. It has changed the way we look at something that is an eventual part of everybody's life. It has changed the expectations. It's changed how we deal with it. And the one thing to remember, especially if you're at a funeral, is that's probably not the time to debate whether or not there's a God or an afterlife with someone,
Right.
just because they happen to believe something. Compassion should win out in those scenarios, but that doesn't mean that I would advocate lying. I think a show of compassion that is truthful, like Ed and I were talking about in different ways, goes a lot further than putting your foot down or talking about how can you be so stupid as to believe this, or anything like that that's going to cause conflicts.
Pick your timing.
Yeah.
And by the way, I've always loved Stephen Wright's line that he was going to donate his body to science fiction. You know.
Anyway.
Okay. Yeah, that was basically my question. Thank you for taking my call. Hope
Sure.
to call in again sometime.
Thanks, Ken. I appreciate it.
Yep.
There's by the way, there's something that I would be remiss if I didn't mention it. We talked about Foundation Beyond Belief today, regard to secular charities. There's another organization called Grief Beyond Belief.
I was going to go there too. Yeah.
And Google it, look it up. It's a really good start for encouraging the secular community to change how we talk about this, how we deal with it, and to provide support for secular people. Because I had a friend once whose teenage son was dying of cancer. She was a Christian. She was so sick of all the platitudes and religious nonsense that she believed but didn't provide any comfort, that she would come to me to talk about, let's talk about pain management. Let's talk about the practicalities of the science. Let's talk about, what we're going to do to make his life better for as long as we can. You can be that person for somebody else. And if you find yourself in that situation where you've lost a loved one and you are tired of dealing with religious nonsense, Grief Beyond Belief is an organization you can reach out to for that and other things.